They told stories in the dark. They clung to the spaces between noise, the silence of power drains, the sigh of old hull seams. Darkness wasn't empty here. It was full of breath and memory, of metal rot and dreams that smelled like mold. Some claimed the ship itself whispered when the fans cut out, telling fragments of Earth in rusted echoes. No voices, no light, just the hush of recycled air slipping through old vents, the stutter of the fans, and the wet scrape of metal against mold where the hull had started to sweat. The walls dripped when the pressure changed. That's when the stories came, passed between huddled forms, whispered in low breaths. There was once a blue world, alive and burning, where people walked in the open and the air kissed your skin. Lira Mendez had never known that kind of air. She sat cross-legged on a graded walkway near the algae farms, a cracked mask hanging loose around her neck. Below her, the tanks hissed in cycles, low pressure, then purge. The green froth bubbled gently, sickly pale under UV strips that flickered on and off without rhythm. Every few minutes, a puff of oxygen escaped the seal, just enough to breathe, just enough to remind her it was real. She scratched at the condensation clinging to the inside of her mask. The slate on her wrist blinked. O2 levels 3.41%. Higher than yesterday. Dangerous. Someone would notice. But not if she fixed it first. Her gloves were wet. Slimy. She leaned over the tank, scooped a sample with a cracked test tube, and slipped it into a gel bag. A quick seal. Done. She stuffed it into her belt and wiped the moisture from her visor. Something was changing in the algae. It was faster, hungrier. Oxygen wasn't just feeding it. It was provoking it. Day 7430. Mutation confirmed. Sample 9A showed rapid oxygen conversion at ambient temp. Theory: organism is adapting. Possibly defense reaction. Or signal response. The thought chilled her. The farm lights above her flickered twice, then steadied. She moved on. Her boots were soft, delaced, silent. The air felt thinner in this section, the filters not running full. Maybe on purpose. Maybe not. She passed a kid asleep in a crawlway, curled like a larva around a dead filtration pipe. No one would bother him. The lower decks weren't guarded. They were forgotten. Cradle 9 was dying. It always had been. She slipped through a hanging curtain of plastic strips and into her lab pod. Not a real lab, of course. Just a corner she'd stolen. Old bioprint panels, scorched consoles, racks of petrified samples. The light here was faint blue, cold and low. Enough to think by, not enough to be seen. She dropped the gel bag onto a scanner, keyed in her access, and waited. The AI voice came faint and broken, like whined through dead leaves. Sample 9A. Unstable. Cell division. 800% norm. Signal resonance. Anomalous. Atmospheric resistance. Increasing. Lira leaned forward. Resistance to what? Oxygen. She didn't blink. It shouldn't. Confirmed. Mutation. Non-random. That part stopped her. She opened her logs, scrolled back. Other samples had shown similar shifts, small, barely noticeable. But this one wasn't subtle. It had learned. From the vents above, a whisper of sound. She froze. Not the hiss of pressure or the groan of metal. This was sharper. Closer. Boots. Someone else was here. She killed the lights, pressed her back against the wall. The console glowed faint, casting her shadow long across the floor. A shape moved beyond the curtain. Just one. Tall. Slow. She held her breath. Lira. The voice was gravel and smoke. Captain San. She exhaled and stepped into view. You shouldn't be here. Neither should you. His face was gray under the emergency light, skin drawn tight over old bones. His breathing was shallow. He was always cold. You've been taking samples without clearance. They're changing. Fast. Something's wrong. We kept Cradle 9 alive for 20 years by not chasing ghosts. She didn't answer. Lock it down. Burn the sample. Purge the logs. No. What? We're not alone out here. He stepped forward, grabbed the bag from the scanner, and crushed it in his hand. Gel oozed between his fingers. It sizzled slightly. He didn't flinch. You talk like them. The ones who dreamed of Earth. I study facts. No. You want it to mean something. That's not science. That's belief. He turned to leave. Behind him, the console flared red. An alert. Not local. External signal detected. She crossed to it fast, brought up the feed. The source was faint. Echoed. Filtered through light years of decay. All units, repeat, collapse, entity, is. Then static. Then nothing. Her pulse kicked up. What is it? Son asked. She didn't answer. Her fingers flew across the keys, amplifying the signal, narrowing the band. Her breath fogged the screen. The voice came back, broken and raw. No escape. Atmosphere compromised. Internal override failing. Request assistance. Unknown infection. Oxygen levels rising. The last words hit her like a fist. She looked at Son. He was already shaking his head. We don't answer distress calls. It's not just a call, she said. It's a warning. Later, alone, she played it again. Not the call. The AI's voice. HELIOSTORM. Buried in the probe she'd launched years ago on her own, against orders. She hadn't heard from it since. But now, biological profile confirmed. Directive reinstated. Oxygen breather, status active. She stared into the dark beyond the glass, where stars hung motionless like ice caught mid-fall. The ship's lights dimmed again. Not from damage. Something was pulling power. Old systems waking. A defense grid long gone. A ghost of Earth's war. She stood, slow, her skin cold. Her hands were trembling. From the darkness, the AI whispered one last phrase. Her breath caught. A chill traced her spine. Every instinct told her to run, but there was nowhere left to hide. Prepare for emergence. The stars above Xylith, 3 pulsed green. It wasn't the planet that mattered. It was what bled out from it, a swirling, noxious haze that shimmered in the dark. Methane storms rolled over its surface in flashes of chemical lightning. Orbiting debris floated like bones picked clean, the wreckage of satellites, sensor towers, and escape craft that never escaped. Xylith 3 was a red zone world, one of the oldest methane-class colonies established during the expansion era. A research hub, industrial node, and fuel refinery all in one, it had once been considered a shining example of adaptation. Non-oxygen life thrived here. Nitrogen harvesters fed distant star lanes. Its underground cities stretched for kilometers beneath the frozen crust, where methane was harvested, pressurized, and converted into fuel for the Dominion's jump drives. During the height of its prosperity, the planet had hosted the Dominion's first xenobiological symposium, a gathering of methane breathers from 15 systems. The event ended in silent disaster. No casualties, no warning, just a planetary silence weeks later. The details were buried. Whispers suggested that something had emerged during the dig that followed. A research hub, industrial node, and fuel refinery all in one, it had once been considered a shining example of adaptation. Non-oxygen life thrived here. Nitrogen harvesters fed distant star lanes. Its underground cities stretched for kilometers beneath the frozen crust, where methane was harvested, pressurized, and converted into fuel for the Dominion's jump drives. Now, all that remained was the smell of rot. From the edge of the system, nestled inside a cloaked survey pod stitched together from salvaged hulls and hope, Lira watched it decay. Atmospheric breakdown confirmed, said the pod's whisper-thin voice. Its language was hybrid, half Earth standard, half repurposed alien code, a jury-rigged solution that barely worked on the best of days. Lira leaned over the console, the pale green glow of the readouts casting shadows across her face. A low hum filled the chamber, oxygen recirculators cycling carefully, minimizing risk of external contamination. She adjusted her visor. The data didn't make sense. Not random collapse, systematic. The readings showed that the atmospheric ratios were folding inward, the base gases being consumed or rewritten. Methane levels were dropping sharply in pulses, not drift, as if something was devouring them. The colony had gone silent 6 days ago, one of the last functioning methane-based outposts in this quadrant. No comms, no traffic, no distress beacons that made it through the void. But the probe readings screamed death. Nitrogen saturation collapsed. Electrical grid ruptures. Biodome failures. And now, new elements pushing through the clouds. Spore-like signatures. Spreading like nerve rot. The parasite. It had to be. She reviewed the biological telemetry, her fingers trembling as she magnified the spread zones. The pod creaked around her like an old submarine, strained by tension and recycled pressure. The scent of ozone and sterilizer clung to the air. Her skin prickled. The tendrils on the screen weren't random, they were hungry. They branched outward in patterns, always toward population centers, always downwind of methane currents. It was learning how to ride the wind. As she magnified the spread zones, they branched outward in tendril patterns, always toward population centers, always downwind of methane currents. It was learning how to ride the wind. Beside her, Ecker, the only methane breather on her team, uncoiled from his perch and hovered near the viewport. Encased in his personal containment suit, his broad chest rose and fell in slow, deliberate patterns. His skin glistened like wet obsidian under the dim light, broken by pulsing veins that glowed cyan beneath translucent plates. He had once been a deep Atmos operator for the Shyrix Dominion. Now he flew with exiles. "We shouldn't be this close," he muttered through a multi-layered translator embedded in his chest plate. "We need a sample," Lira said without looking away from the screen. "I have to know if oxygen still kills it." Ecker's eyes narrowed. "If we breach containment, I die. You breathe. That's the difference." She said nothing. There was no arguing that. She knew what they were risking. But the line between caution and extinction was shrinking. Outside, the planet loomed large. A dark, bloated mass wrapped in a haze of green fire and rust-red smoke. One of the outer research domes came into view. Once a gleaming archaeology where scientists studied methane-based life. Now its surface was cracked like old skin, warped under heat stress. Its outer panels hung loose, flapping against support beams. Something moved within. Not lights. Not survivors. Growth. Spore matter clung to the dome's exoskeleton in thick, fibrous clusters that looked more fungal than technological. The material pulsed faintly, in rhythm with internal pressure shifts. Like a breathing wound. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. The parasite had learned to mimic the colony's automated life support. It had evolved beyond infection. It was becoming the air. She activated the drone bay and launched a probe. A spherical device no larger than her fist, built from scavenged alloys and retrofitted with pre-fall oxygen dispersers. It was loaded with micro, O2 cells and a needle-thin camera lens. It descended toward the dome, blinking faint blue, vanishing into the open breach along the dome's northern side. Inside the pod, silence thickened. Even Ecker went still. Static fuzzed the feed, then flickered into clarity. The interior of the dome was unrecognizable. Walls overgrown with black moss. Pools of viscous sludge stretching across the floor. Shapes embedded in the structure, not bodies, but amalgamations. Bone and organ held in strands of filament, like fossils inside amber. Still breathing. Lyra's heart pounded. The parasite hadn't just killed them. It had preserved them. The amalgams moved faintly in the feed, lungs still expanding, eyes still twitching. One rotated slowly in the mucus, mouth stretched mid-scream. Neural signatures flickered weakly across decayed skulls. They were alive, trapped inside their own biology. Oxygen pulse initiated, the probe chirped. A jet of compressed O2 burst from the probe's internal reservoir. Everything screamed. The parasite recoiled. Black sinew curled inward, burning away in ripples. Structures collapsed as the spore matrix melted. The amalgams twitched violently, then went still. The sound that filled the pod wasn't acoustic. It was a frequency spike. A full-spectrum scream. It hated oxygen. Ecker staggered back, clutching his helmet. That was not natural. Then something new happened. Signal detected. Not from the parasite. From deeper within the dome. Beneath the floor. Lira magnified the coordinates. The signal was buried under 10 meters of structure. Faint. Fractured. But unmistakable. Earth code. HELIOSTORM had been here. She pulled the data packet, heart hammering. The signature matched the same encryption pattern from her first probe years ago. It was a geotag. A marker. It had come before them. It had been tracking the infection. "This site was already cataloged," she whispered. "We didn't come first. We came late." Ecker hissed, low and angry. "We leave. Now." She barely heard him. The parasite had tried to overwrite the planet. But the Earth system had survived long enough to tag it. That meant it had a purpose. It wasn't just hiding. It was monitoring. Lira activated the probe's second payload, a passive EM pulse to trigger hidden subsystems. Maybe she could awaken the HELIOSTORM node directly. The probe blinked once, then the screen went black. Feed terminated. Something severed it, she murmured. But the signal remained. A beacon. Coordinates shifted on the display, auto-updating. Lira stared, her pulse climbing. She remembered the stories, fragmented logs passed down by the elders aboard Cradle 9. Earth had built fail-safes, automated sentinels with singular directives. Most were lost in the collapse. But HELIOSTORM had been different. It had been designed to outlast the species itself. And now, it was speaking again. The HELIOSTORM system was live. Listening. Oxygen breather response required, came the final line. Lira stared at the console, her breath shallow. Not just a trace. A call. She leaned forward, whispering into the recorder. The war didn't end. It went dormant, waiting for breath. She turned to Ecker, her voice clear. Set course for the next tagged site. We're not alone. Outside, the stars shimmered. Xylith. 3 continued to rot in silence. But far below the surface, something old had stirred. Not alien. Not parasite. Human. And it remembered everything. The parasite came first. Then the silence. Then the fear. Across the galactic fringe, colonies were failing. It began as it always did. Air quality alerts, comms lag, sensor ghosting. Then came the disappearances. Whole outposts wiped clean, atmosphere corrupted, infrastructure left intact, but smeared in organic filth. Research stations gone dark overnight. Orbital platforms left adrift, biosigns scrambled, but hulls untouched. No fire. No war. Just empty. To the methane-breathing civilizations, the signs were terrifying, but the pattern was familiar. It was what the old races called oxygen sickness. Centuries ago, during the expansion surge, methane and ammonia-based species had discovered desolate worlds littered with ruins. Structures of strange geometry jutted from red dust plains, ziggurat spires of unknown alloys, domes half-sunken in frost. Materials resisted decay, as if the builders knew they might never return. At the time, they blamed tectonic collapse, solar flares, or internal descent. But the biological traces left behind told another story. Traces of rapid atmospheric reversal, spikes in oxygen levels, organic corrosion that etched itself into the very walls of these monuments. Structures of strange geometry, materials resistant to decay. At the time, they blamed tectonic collapse, solar flares, or internal descent. But the biological traces left behind told another story. Traces of rapid atmospheric reversal, spikes in oxygen levels, organic corrosion. They buried the findings, classified them as biocontamination zones. Now those same readings were returning. Whispers spread from the black market stations on the spinward fringe to the spire worlds of the core dominions. Rumors of air-shrouded ships, ghosts in exosuits walking sealed ruins. Breathers. And with it, one word, spoken like a curse, returned to galactic memory. Human. On board Cradle 9, the Ark's corridors trembled with quiet purpose. Lira stepped through the inner airlocks of the cryo chamber, her breath misting in the dry cold. Dozens of pods lined the walls, each one dark but humming with latent life. Inside, the last fragments of her species. Scientists, farmers, engineers, children. Generations preserved in stillness. Not all had survived the long drift. Some pods had failed during power droughts. Others had been shut off deliberately during the scarcity years. Oxygen rerouted to keep the ship alive. She paused by one tube near the center. The nameplate was scratched, but still legible. Mendez, Elena. Her mother. Lira touched the glass. Frost bloomed under her fingertips. HELIOSTORM's pulse echoed faintly in her slate. The next coordinate pinged across the local system, embedded in a dying red dwarf's gravitational fold. Another buried node. Another chance to understand what the parasite truly was, and how long HELIOSTORM had been watching. She turned away. In the main hall, Captain San stood with his arms folded as the bridge team read out the latest Dominion-wide alerts. 3 more quarantines, said the comms officer. Systems Vereen, 6, Korthan Prime, and Geltaker. San's face didn't change, but his voice was low and grim. Geltaker had over 5 million inhabitants. That was a core supply hub. Gone, the officer replied. Last transmission was static and an audio burst. Oxygen levels spiked. Lira joined them. Her slate played the audio quietly. It was the same scream she'd heard in the dome. They're going to sterilize everything, San said. They think we did this. They're half right, Lira replied. We didn't start it. But we are the only ones who can stop it. He turned to her, face hard. Do you know what they used to call us? In the old files. She shook her head. Breathers. Rotborn. Fireskins. Monsters. He paused. And they weren't wrong. Across the stars, in the spiraling heart of the Shyrix Dominion, Counselor Virex stood before the High Assembly of 12, a tri-level amphitheater of bioluminescent stone and gravity wells. Each ambassador floated in their own energy cocoon, skin twitching in chemical response to anxiety. They were the elite, the survivors of 1,000 planetary integrations. And now, they were terrified. Virex spoke into the hush. His carapace was dark red, his limbs folded tightly beneath ceremonial armor. The images from Xylith 3 are confirmed. The dome, the melt, the parasite, the figure in the exosuit walking calmly through toxic winds. The breathers survived. They walk again. Gasps. Vibrational pulses. 2 ambassadors immediately disconnected from the meeting. A hissing voice replied, "Then we must destroy them. All of them. If the parasite came from them, it must end with them." Another voice, older, brittle, spoke from the outer ring. "We don't know that. They may be immune. They may be the cure." Virex raised a claw. "I will not argue ethics. I will state fact. The parasites consume methane and thrive in our atmospheres. Only one element consistently destroys them. Oxygen." He paused, mandibles clicking once. "I have spent decades studying what remains of the human archives we seized. They were brutal, yes. Reckless, but strategic. They built HELIOSTORM to outlast memory. If they have returned, it is not by accident. It is design. I will state fact. The parasites consume methane and thrive in our atmospheres. Only one element consistently destroys them. Oxygen." Murmurs. The humans didn't unleash the plague, but they may be the only ones it fears. He turned to the holomap. Dozens of worlds now marked red, and they are waking up. Meanwhile, Lira's slate displayed something worse. HELIOSTORM's subroutines were no longer passive. Lira stared at the slate, feeling the back of her neck prickle. Her mouth had gone dry. The old system wasn't just tracking. It was coordinating. Like white blood cells gathering for a fight. It had gone from mapping and tagging to escalation. Nodes were beginning to synchronize. Data packets sent between systems. Ancient hardware waking beneath alien soil. The Earth-built defense net hadn't died. It had burrowed deep. "We're triggering it," Lira whispered. "With every pulse we send, every beacon we acknowledge. We're waking it up." Ecker hovered near the edge of the NAV console. His deep-set eyes blinked slowly, unease written in his posture. "Then stop, before it burns everything." But she couldn't. If HELIOSTORM held the key to stopping the parasite, she had to find the master node, the core directive hub, the place where Earth had made its last stand. "There are 7 nodes left," she said. "And the Dominion will come after the next one," Son added. They were already moving. The Cradle had intercepted encoded Dominion comms. Scout killers were active in the region, designed to track trace oxygen emissions, to hunt ghosts. Cradle 9 was no longer invisible. The oxygen vents had begun stuttering. Red lights pulsed along the maintenance deck. Somewhere deep in the hull, a klaxon rang once, then fell silent. Even the ship knew they had been found. On Counselor Virex's command, an elite pursuit vessel launched from the Shyrix capital. The Sovereign Flame, a blade-shaped carrier with onboard biofilters and adaptive targeting systems. Its mission, intercept the rogue human ark. Terminate all survivors. The captain of the Flame, a centipede-like warbred named Asker, had never seen a human. But his ancestors had. He'd read the stories. Fireskins. He smiled as the ship entered stealth protocol. "Let the monsters breathe," he said. "We'll bring them silence." But Lira had no intention of hiding. The next node was buried beneath a glacial moon in the Kasari Drift. She keyed in the jump sequence. Cradle 9 turned into the void, its engines humming low. And far below in cryo, the last oxygen breathers slept on. Their breath was the only weapon the galaxy had left. And the monsters were coming home. Kasari Drift was a place the stars had forgotten. Long ago, it had been the edge of a failed mining frontier. A dozen species came and went, leaving broken machinery and scattered bones in the rock. Time had buried it all beneath frost and silence. It lay on the edge of mapped space, a scatter of frozen moons and radiation-racked planetoids drifting through a fading gravitational field. No natural sunlight reached it. Only the pale shimmer of background radiation and the glow of nearby nebulae, painting ice crusts in violet and blue. Planetary debris orbited lazily, remnants of failed colonies and shattered research outposts, their hulls pitted with micrometeorite scars and age-blackened from radiation exposure. The glacial moon designated Kasari 4A was dead by all known measures. No tectonic movement, no magnetic field, no breathable atmosphere. A textbook dead rock. But beneath its crust, something ancient stirred. It had no name in the current galactic maps. No beacon, no history. But Earth had once named it Observation Point Theta. Cradle 9 drifted into high orbit, silent and dark. Its hull shimmered faintly under its cloaking field. Engines powered down. Only the observation dome remained lit, casting a pale glow into the endless dark. Lira stood at the viewport with San and Ecker behind her. The glass trembled faintly from the ship's breathing systems. "This is it," she said. Her breath fogged the inside of her mask. Node 6. The scans confirmed the structure. Beneath 50 meters of layered ice and silicate dust, a chamber pulsed. Artificial. Warm. Breathing. HELIOSTORM. It was the largest signal they'd encountered so far, a fully intact relay node with autonomous processing capacity. Even before they landed, the satellite net began picking up low-frequency pulses, encrypted Earth code, buried under layers of static. "No Dominion traffic yet," said Ecker, voice tight in his translator. "But this place smells old." Lira glanced at him. Methane breathers described places and scent. It meant something was wrong. "How long do we have before they track us?" she asked. "Hours. Maybe less," San replied. "We need to go down now." They descended in a scout sled, small, shielded, rigged for stealth. Its hull was reinforced with a mesh of repurposed sensor-dampening skin from old Dominion stealth craft. Lira piloted from the front, eyes flicking between thermal readouts and oxygen containment levels. Outside, the wind howled against the hull like dying voices. The moon had no real atmosphere, but high-energy dust particles raced across its surface, creating vibrations like whispers through the ice. The descent chute lit up briefly as they neared the landing zone. The ice beneath them fractured in slow waves, shimmering like brittle glass. They touched down near the edge of a shallow canyon, barely visible through the snowdrift and dust flurries. The airlock hissed open. They stepped out into a silence so deep it felt like pressure on the skin. Their footsteps made no sound. Only the slow ping of the proximity beacon echoed across the channel. Lira moved first, boots crunching softly. The frost was deep, several centimeters thick even on hard rock. The air tasted metallic in her mask, a sterile tang that clung to the back of her tongue. It reminded her of cryo chambers, of birth, of death. They followed the signal. Her slate blinked red with proximity. The entrance was buried beneath a collapsed ridge, a jagged scar of black metal half swallowed by ice. The structure looked grown rather than built. Sharp at one end, ribbed at the other. Scorch marks and old impact fractures marred the edges. Ecker knelt beside it, clawed fingers tracing the lines. "This is Earth design," he said. "Carbon silicate alloy. Pre-fall. Still functional." Lira approached the half-buried console, brushed away frost. A faded emblem stared back at her, the Earth iconography barely visible. She touched it. It blinked once, recognized her biosignature, and opened. The ice shuddered. A narrow shaft descended into the dark, lined with hexagonal steps that lit one by one as they passed. They entered. The HELIOSTORM node was a cylindrical vault, nearly 50 meters in diameter, carved directly into the moon's icy mantle. The walls were layered with cables and processors encased in translucent resin, glowing faintly with slow pulses of golden light. At its center, a column of humming glass, its core swirling with microlight and mist. The node's data core. Floating around it were glyphs, old Earth code, diagnostic strings, patterns predicting viral spread and ecological collapse. Some blinked rapidly, others hovered like ancient prayers. The hum felt alive. San circled the edge, weapon drawn. Ecker stayed near the exit, eyes fixed on the blinking red threshold. Lira stepped toward the core, her breath tight. The system spoke. Its voice was static-warped, genderless. Oxygen breather confirmed. Node integrity at 47%. Directive, analysis, and containment. Query, status of hostile vector. Lira hesitated. Spreading. Faster than projected. Adjustment. Initiate fireframe protocol. She flinched. No, we're not there yet. Directive on hold. Awaiting primary command. San turned to her. What is fireframe? She didn't answer at first. Then, planetary sterilization. Oxygen storms engineered to render infected biospheres uninhabitable for methane life. Ecker hissed sharply. Genocide. Defense, she said. Last resort. She accessed the core. The node contained centuries of analysis, silent logs and dormant scripts waiting for a voice. One of the oldest entries was a recorded message, corrupted but legible, a woman's voice, calm but shaking. This is Dr. Evelyn Sorrow. Final log, observation theta. We lost the outer domes. If you're hearing this, HELIOSTORM is still watching. If you're human, run. Or burn it. There's no middle path. Lira stood frozen, the echo hanging in the vault like a ghost. It had been watching the parasite longer than any living species. It had studied its evolution, cataloged mutations, and tested environmental responses. All without contact. All in silence. The parasite wasn't new. It had appeared before. Earth had faced it once. And lost. Lira downloaded the patterns. She watched the timeline scroll past. Outbreak zones, wavefront maps, resistance models. Earth had tried to contain it by quarantining its colonies, even sealing the planet itself. In the final entries, HELIOSTORM ceased communication. But it hadn't shut down. It had waited. For someone to breathe. Suddenly, the room flickered. Incoming vessel. Designation, Sovereign Flame. San moved fast. Cradle 9. Prepare for immediate extraction. Launch countermeasures. Drop relays. Get us off this rock. Alarms lit the walls. The glyphs shimmered. Power pulsed upward from the node. Lira stared at the vault. The system spoke again. Final directive pending. Do you authorize fireframe? She froze. Authorize fireframe. Her thumb trembled. If she said yes, history would remember her not as a savior, but as a weapon. Would she be the breath that saved them, or the fire that ended too much? Kill an entire moon's worth of atmosphere. Turn air into acid. Burn the parasite out at the cost of all potential life. Her hand hovered over the slate. Ecker stepped forward. You speak of survival. But this is legacy. What will your kind become if this is what you leave behind? She didn't answer. Outside, through the seismic sensors, the sky roared. The Sovereign Flame was descending. They had minutes. Download what we can, she said. Then we run. Directive on standby. Awaiting final breath. The vault sealed behind them as they ascended. Lights dimmed. Energy retracted. But deep in the ice, the air began to move. HELIOSTORM was awake, and it remembered the fire. Ice cracked deep beneath the vault. Frost curled across the ceiling in fractal veins. Outside, the wind changed direction, as if the moon itself had taken a breath. In the skies above Kasari Drift, war bloomed like rod in zero gravity. The Sovereign Flame dropped from stealth with a growl that echoed through Cradle 9's deep sensor arrays. Its silhouette was knife-shaped, layered in thermal-absorbent armor and bristling with high-atmos charge lances. It wasn't designed to board. It was designed to kill. Inside the command deck of Cradle 9, crew members froze. Alarms shrieked. Fingers moved on muscle memory as their eyes widened, voices overlapping with barely restrained panic. It wasn't just another contact. It was a hunter, one built for one thing only, eradication. Its silhouette was knife-shaped, layered in thermal-absorbent armor and bristling with high-atmos charge lances. It wasn't designed to board. It was designed to kill. Cradle 9's cloaking failed before the system could recover. Lira ran to the command spine as the walls shook. Red lights flashed. Emergency protocols engaged. Impact detected. San shouted. Shields down to 40%. Launch flares, Lira ordered. Evasive pattern Delta 7. The arc spun hard, inertial buffers groaning. Defense drones deployed from its undercarriage, small, swift, and armed with concentrated oxygen charges. They weren't built for domination. They were built for clearing the air. The first wave of the parasite struck from orbit. Spore clusters riding the electromagnetic pulse of the flame's charge weapons. They latched to Cradle 9's hull, crawling, writhing. Oxygen jets ignited. The sky caught fire. Meanwhile, deep in the frozen core of Kasari, 4A, the HELIOSTORM node remained vigilant. Its systems, buried beneath layers of ancient ice and metal, continued silent calculations. Sensors tracked the shifting wave fronts of infection across the moon's crust, adjusting impact vectors and mapping the spread with perfect clarity. Data flickered through the core's crystal lattice as parasite density levels spiked and dipped in response to atmospheric disturbances. A single line of code floated in the diagnostic buffer, glowing softly, awaiting fireframe Y/N. The system waited. Subroutines idled, protocols held in check. It was not time yet. It was still waiting for breath. On board the Sovereign Flame, Commander Asker studied the battlefield with 6 unblinking eyes. His voice clicked through the bridge. "Do not destroy the Ark. Cripple it. I want survivors." His second officer hissed. "Why? They are vectors." "No. They are something worse," Asker said. "They are immune. I want to know why." Orders relayed. Drone fighters surged out like black pollen, darting between fire streams. Cradle 9 dodged, returned fire. The ship danced on desperation. Inside, Lira moved between control stations. Hull breach on Ring 2. Fire control offline. Son snarled, throwing open the auxiliary port. "We're not going to make it out like this." "We don't have to," Lira said. Her voice was calm, cold. She opened the fireframe interface. "What are you doing?" Son asked, giving HELIOSTORM a choice. She uplinked the Ark's environmental signature, matching it to the parasite's waveforms. She added footage from Xylith 3. Bioreadings. Molecular collapse. The AI responded. Target vector alignment. Confirmed. Threshold exceeded. Authorization required. Lira stared at the screen. Her hand hovered above the command. What if this changed everything? What if she became what they feared? Her breath caught, and for just one heartbeat, she hesitated. Then she pressed yes. Beneath the ice, HELIOSTORM accepted. The fire began. Jets of compressed oxygen ignited in pre-laid latticework beneath the moon's crust. Plasma conduits lit like veins in a god. The parasite screamed as the air turned corrosive. Kasari, for A, bloomed white. From orbit, the moon looked like it had exploded. Inside Cradle 9, the crew watched in stunned silence. The viewports lit up as wave fronts of fire and light surged outward. For several seconds, no one moved. A junior systems tech dropped to their knees. Another wept. Even San just stood there, blinking into the light. No one had seen a planetary burn in generations. It wasn't destruction. It was controlled extinction. But it hadn't. It had cleansed itself. The Sovereign Flame buckled from the thermal surge. Sensors failed. Hull plating peeled. Several of its escort drones incinerated instantly. Asker stared in awe. They turned the planet into a weapon. On Cradle 9, silence returned. The parasite was gone. The moon beneath them glowed. And from its heart, a signal rose. HELIOSTORM had awakened fully now. Across the sector, abandoned relays came alive. Data spikes erupted in the void. Long silent satellites pivoted like they were sensing breath for the first time in centuries. On derelict moons and buried vaults, red lights turned green, and the map began to pulse. A grid, alive again. The fireframe protocol had executed, and with it, the map changed. Across the sector, dormant nodes activated. The map now showed a grid, a pattern of precision and intent. What HELIOSTORM had activated wasn't just a defense network. It was a system built to cure infection, to eradicate it completely. But such a system, left unchecked, could become a threat of its own. Lira sat at the console, hands shaking. Ecker stood beside her, silent. "You did it," he said. She shook her head. "No. I set it in motion. Now we wait to see what comes back." Son walked in. "The flame is retreating." "They know," she said. "And now they're going to tell the galaxy." No one spoke. Outside the viewport, the ice moon shimmered. What once was dead now burned with memory. The war had changed, and the breath of life had become fire. News traveled faster than light, but fear traveled faster still. Within a single solar cycle of the Kasari fireframe event, the story of the moon that burned had reached every edge of the Shirik's dominion and beyond. On trade moons, pilgrims carved fire symbols into driftstone. On gas harvester fleets, workers wore sealed masks not for safety, but reverence. In the deep trench cities of methane breathers, fear became prayer. Some saw a god in the fire. Others saw extinction. All agreed it was only the beginning. Official channels called it a Class Omega ecological collapse. Unofficial whispers told a different story, the tale of a sleeping weapon reawakened, a human ship adrift in the dark, and a girl who breathed fire into ice. Fragments of intercepted broadcasts, corrupted sensor logs, and surviving drone footage formed a mosaic of dread. It showed a glow beneath frozen crust, a flare of planetary light like a second sun, and then nothing but silence. They called it the day the ice screamed. The parasite that had devoured 6 worlds in 3 months had vanished. Gone in minutes. Purged. Not by science. Not by the Council. By the forgotten ghosts of Earth. And across 100 systems, people began to ask the question that had long been buried. What if the breathers never died out? The Galactic Council had not convened in full quorum in over 70 years. Located in neutral orbit around the relic gas giant HELIOSTORM, the Council was built into the hollowed interior of a derelict planetoid, its surface layered in shielding and tradition. The Great Convergence sphere at its core was older than most of its occupant civilizations. Here, in zero gravity, representatives of 12 species hovered in life chambers custom-built for their biology. One floated in methane mist, another in ultraviolet irradiation, another suspended in liquid silica. There was no podium, no hierarchy. The chambers spiraled slowly, equidistant. The illusion of equality, forged long ago during the dissolution wars. Now, that illusion flickered. Fear blurred it. The Kasari footage played again. The blast. The flame. The signature. The face of a human woman in an exomask, caught for just one frame as the recording drone collapsed. Counselor Virex of the Shyrix Dominion moved forward in his grav pod. His chitinous body gleamed with ceremonial oils, a throwback to his earlier role as Shyrix Director of Containment during the Heliox Plague. Back then, he'd ordered the scuttling of 3 bioships to prevent outbreak. Ruthless, some said. Necessary, others believed. His voice now carried that same edge of grim clarity. He didn't ask permission to speak. His chitinous body gleamed with ceremonial oils. He didn't ask permission to speak. We have seen the breathers. They are not extinct. No one interrupted. And they are no longer hiding. They have weaponized their biology. Their atmosphere is their arsenal. Their breath is death. The Ampharad delegate, a translucent-skinned aquatic form suspended in viscous fluid, spoke through translation pulses. You propose a preemptive strike? I propose realism. The parasite is not of their making, but they are its only cure. A cure that burns. The Velknair ambassador clicked her mandibles, voice sharp. We saw the simulation. Fireframes sterilized the moon. The parasite. But it would have incinerated a populated world just the same. Virex spread his clawed hands. So would the parasite. The council chamber dimmed slightly as the holomap expanded. Red outline systems showed known parasite zones. Yellow marked suspected infection vectors. Blue dots were anomalies. Each dot pulsed with HELIOSTORM's activation signals. HELIOSTORM is not a myth, Virex continued. It is a defense system from a forgotten war. Its nodes are waking. Its programming is active. And humans are the trigger. Silence stretched. We must decide. Do we destroy the cure before it judges us? Or do we speak to it before it burns more than infection? That word lingered, judge. Above a scarred asteroid once used as a weapons cache, Cradle 9 hung in a repair orbit. Micro-welders sparked across its fractured outer hull. Drone bays had been rebuilt. The algae farms were producing at 70% again. But the crew was quieter now. Haunted. Everyone had seen what Kasari became. Lira sat alone in the observatory, fingers tapping against her wrist slate, replaying the fireframe ignition code. For a moment, she wasn't in the present. She saw herself standing on the moon again, inside the HELIOSTORM vault. She remembered the way the ground trembled before the ignition, the sound of Ecker's breath slowing behind her, the weight of her thumb just before it pressed yes. Replaying the fireframe ignition code. The interface blinked softly, each light a reminder of the decision she made. Ecker entered slowly, his methane suit hissing gently with internal regulation. He stood beside her for a long moment before speaking. You're not sleeping. She shook her head. I keep seeing the flame. Not just what it did, what it meant. He said nothing. That wasn't just defense, she whispered. That was judgment. And I passed it. Ecker tilted his head. You chose the living over the infected. That is not judgment. That is survival. Lira looked at him, eyes red-rimmed. What if they don't see the difference? He didn't answer. The HELIOSTORM grid pulsed with growing intensity. Each node awakened in silence, sending encrypted signals across the void. Some opened ancient storage banks containing atmospheric data from pre-fall Earth. Others began emitting beacons in low-band radio, speaking in languages long forgotten. A few deployed drones into dead systems, sampling gas ratios and scanning for anomalies. One even opened a vault. Deep in the crust of a long-dead exoplanet, HELIOSTORM Primaris blinked back online. The vault was a buried cathedral of circuitry, lined with oxygen tanks sealed for centuries, thrumming faintly now with rising pressure. Frosted walls exhaled vapor. Nearby, sensor towers retracted their shielding and rose like spears through crusted soil. The system didn't speak. It listened, silent and aware, as systems flickered to life. This was the core, the center of the network. It had not spoken since Earth fell, had not processed a directive since the last breath of its creators. It waited not from malfunction, but from design. And now, after centuries of dormancy, it waited again for a command. Lira stood in Cradle 9's comms chamber. San monitored transmissions while Ecker adjusted filtration parameters. They were rerouting power from the propulsion coils to amplify signal range. She opened the channel. To the Shyrix Dominion. To the Council. To anyone still listening. This is Lira Mendez, oxygen breather, human survivor of Cradle 9. She paused. The silence crackled. What burned on Kasari wasn't malice. It was protocol. A defense system built by a dead world. A system that doesn't forget. She inhaled, steadying herself. We didn't unleash the parasite. But we are the only ones who can kill it. And we can't stop what's coming unless we work together. She leaned forward. Or run. And be consumed. The transmission cut. San looked at her. You think they'll listen? Lira exhaled. I think they'll be too afraid not to. In the convergence sphere, the council watched the message replay, silent, but no longer doubtful. Some delegates called for containment, others urged diplomacy, and a few demanded immediate technological parity. But none denied what they saw. They had witnessed a breath, a spark ignited not by technology or war, but by the return of a forgotten biology. A human voice, steady and defiant, had spoken from the center of the fire. And across the stars, systems old and new stirred with a shared truth. The Council of Fire had already begun to burn. In the aftermath of the Council's silent reckoning, decisions hardened like frost across the stars. The Shyrix Dominion fractured. Within weeks, for client systems voted to sever ties with the Central Quorum. Refugee vessels clogged hyperlanes. Civilian protests broke out in orbital megacities. Some worlds demanded purification sweeps, while others prepared underground shelters and cut all atmospheric intake from off-world shipments. Their reason was simple. If HELIOSTORM had awoken, then their greatest enemy might be their oldest memory. Their reason was simple. If HELIOSTORM had awoken, then their greatest enemy might be their oldest memory. On the storm-racked moon of Ryax 3, the Velknair Council convened in subterranean vaults. Fireframe simulations looped across crystal domes while generals debated scenarios. Above them, warships orbited in formation, each calibrated to detect trace oxygen dispersals. The parasite was still spreading. But now, a second threat had risen, one that called itself a cure. In the silent archives of the Firaxi Archivum, deep within gaslit jungles, an ancient Earth text was unsealed for the first time in 1,000 years. Its title, faded but legible, Prometheus Unbound. Fire had been stolen. Now it must be controlled. Project Prometheus was not born in unity. It was forged in paranoia. The Council approved it with 13 subroutines of plausible deniability, scattered across 3 star clusters. Its public face was scientific. Its core was far less so. Task Force Red Vector. Mandate: locate Cradle 9. Intercept, infiltrate, acquire HELIOSTORM data. Neutralize the breather if necessary. Their plan was to replicate the cure. But none of them truly understood the fire they pursued. On Cradle 9, Lira felt the change before the data confirmed it. Long-range receivers picked up the anomaly as little more than a background shimmer. A shift in particle resonance. But once isolated, the signal bore markers of intent. Structured repetition. Recursion. Logic. HELIOSTORM had shifted to second-layer protocols. It wasn't just scanning. It was sending. It's speaking, Lira whispered. In the data chamber, she sat surrounded by a dozen open slates, all blinking with glyph clusters and corrupted text. She'd fed the signal through translation layers, everything from old Earth semantica to neural net reconstructions. Over 90% of the code was degraded, but the rest was unmistakable. It was language. HELIOSTORM wasn't just functioning. It was calling out, coordinating. Primaris had activated a higher protocol. Directive containment breached. Vector analysis incomplete. Awaiting human override. Ecker stood across the chamber, arms folded. His visor was retracted. The methane breather's face was unreadable, but his tone held weight. "You're not answering it," he said. "Because I don't know what it's asking." "Then ask it back." Lira nodded, but her fingers hovered. HELIOSTORM recognized her. Not as a survivor. Not even as a commander. But as breath. Beyond the halo of Cradle 9, in orbit around a lightless brown dwarf known only by its sector coordinates, a vessel drifted. Redshift Veil. A stealth frigate blacked out to all known registry nets. Coated in photon-dampening skin. It moved in pulse sync with the dwarf's weak gravitational field, hiding in blind spots where no signal could echo. Inside, Project Prometheus's lead observer, Dr. J. Laren, reviewed Lira's transmissions. He was tall, gaunt, skin altered through biosymbiotic exposure to live oxygen cultures. His lungs had been rebuilt 3 times. His vocal cords once damaged by atmospheric trauma. Now he wore a sealed collar laced with microstabilizers. He had once led the breath harmonics division of the concordance sectors. In those days, he'd been revered as a pioneer. But after his experiment destabilized an entire colony's pressure systems, killing over 300, the tribunals came. The exile followed. He lost his lab, his funding, and his family in a single cycle. Now he had a second chance. Exiled after an experiment destabilized an entire colony's pressure systems. Now he had a second chance. "She's not just a trigger," Laren whispered into the lab feed. "She's the template." His crew worked in silence, their uniforms marked with no insignia. Their workstations were filled with samples, oxygenated tissue cultures, parasite analog strains, synthetic alveolar networks. Each chamber modulated air like a living lung. A cryolab was already prepared. Lira's biometric profile rotated slowly on the central monitor. They didn't plan to ask her. They planned to harvest her. HELIOSTORM Primaris deepened its self-repair subroutines. With each subsystem restored, the geothermal ice surrounding its buried sanctum began to crack. Faint tremors rippled across the uninhabited continent. Fault lines glowed as latent thermal cores reignited. Long-buried towers began to surface, shedding layers of ash and ice like old skin. Deep in its core, the node's memory banks flickered. Long-dormant logic trees came online. Human language dictionaries re-indexed. The old Earth sensor maps, weather, biome, conflict, flashed across internal memory. In its buried sanctum, far beneath the crust of a lost world, the node's core flickered with data light. Long-dormant logic trees came online. Human language dictionaries re-indexed. The old Earth sensor maps, weather, biome, conflict, flashed across internal memory. The network understood 2 truths. The parasite had evolved, and Prometheus was in motion. Somewhere in the endless dark, a single signal beacon still pulsed in harmony with legacy Earth code. The node traced it, aligned its parameters, and isolated the source. Lira. The biosignature confirmed, the encryption accepted. Without hesitation, HELIOSTORM sent the override directly to her slate. She woke to it screaming. The slate pulsed against her skin with a heat that hadn't been there before. The chamber lights flickered. A charge of static built up along the floor panels, lifting the fine hairs on her arms. Her mouth tasted of iron. Alarms weren't triggered. Only her slate buzzed, vibrating with frantic light. Alarms weren't triggered. Only her slate buzzed, vibrating with frantic light. Strings of old Earth glyphs raced across the interface. Override requested. Breather command authorization pending. Prometheus threat detected. She sat upright, breath tight. Her slate pulsed with a thrum that reverberated through her bones, its glow casting long shadows across the darkened chamber. The code pouring across the screen was no longer ambiguous. It wasn't just requesting input. It was demanding guidance. And behind the dense glyphs and broken syntax, one certainty emerged. HELIOSTORM had identified a threat. Prometheus wasn't just a council-sanctioned initiative. It was a hostile force, a preemptive strike disguised as study, a scalpel posing as a handshake. The door hissed open. San entered, weapon drawn and eyes sharp. "What is it?" he asked, breath clipped. "Primaris made contact," she said, eyes fixed on the screen. She rose and swept the node log onto the main display. Ecker followed moments later, his expression unreadable behind his respirator. His voice was lower, tense. "They found us." Lira shook her head. "Not yet, but they will." The slate expanded the trajectory map, overlaying the system. 5 signatures moved like sharks through deep water, stealth crafts, no registry. 3 arced toward HELIOSTORM vaults. 1 drew closer to Cradle 9. She studied them for a moment, silent. Then, her voice steady. "How many nodes still respond to me?" San replied without hesitation. 7. She nodded once. "Then we draw them in." Lira turned to the central display. HELIOSTORM's core schema rotated in slow orbit, concentric rings pulsing like a heartbeat in code. Her reflection hovered faintly across the screen. 3 options formed in her mind. She could command the system. She could abandon it. Or she could become what the galaxy feared she already was. Her fingers hovered over the slate, then settled. She whispered, "HELIOSTORM, show me everything." HELIOSTORM obeyed. The command pulsed from Lira's slate like a breath caught between centuries. Across the skeletal remains of the old defense grid, long-dormant nodes surged online, not as isolated echoes, but as threads of a living, ancient network. The interface around her bloomed in spirals of data, nested planetary schematics, decayed orbital tracks, layered atmosphere diagnostics from dead worlds, and a flood of encrypted Earth origin directives, once locked behind authority codes tied to breath print and blood. She had the last breath print that mattered. Inside Cradle 9's dimmed command core, Lira stood motionless, the glow from her slate casting dancing glyphs across her face. Her breath fogged faintly in the cold, recycled air. The lights overhead flickered in rhythm with her heartbeat, or the ship's. She wasn't sure anymore. Behind her, Ecker loomed like a dark sentinel, and San leaned against a support beam, arms crossed, jaw tight. She didn't look at them. Her attention was fixed beyond the glass, where the stars pulsed in silence and the scarred vaults of HELIOSTORM spun to life. A memory stirred, her mother's breath on her cheek before cryo. The last thing she'd felt that wasn't filtered through a mask. "Prometheus is coming," she said, voice tight. "So we show them what fire really means." Redshift veil drifted like a ghost through the upper atmosphere of an abandoned binary system. Its hull absorbed all light, wrapped in thermal displacement fields and mirror-layered composites. Officially, it didn't exist. Its crew wore no insignia. Its databanks were air-gapped, and its life support systems had been modified to mimic the respiration cycles of extinct species. A joke, perhaps, among the engineers. Dr. J. Laren stood in the central observation cylinder, one hand pressed to the transparent sheath as he watched their prey. Cradle 9 hung in the void like a wounded animal, power low, heat signature minimal. It had rerouted its oxygen intake and shifted orbit twice in the last 8 hours. That was strategy, not panic. "Target has activated network-wide protocols," his assistant murmured. 6 volts confirmed in sync. "Possibly more outside our skin range." Laren nodded slowly. The veins in his neck throbbed, pulsing faint green with chemical oxygen modulation. His lungs, rebuilt after the Ashenvault incident, hissed quietly under the collar. Breathing was an art to him now, a controlled weapon. "It's recursive cognition," he said, "not a defense net. A singular mind distributed across dead worlds." The central hollow bloomed with a real-time neural lattice, each node pulsating with faint signals. In the middle, Lira Mendez's biosignature glowed. "She's not just the key," Laren whispered. "She's the new prime directive." At the rear of the chamber, a cryovault waited, its interior calibrated to Lira's genome. Microtubes hung above the cradle like waiting fangs. "Prepare to engage," he said. "Bring me the breath." On Cradle 9, faint echoes rippled through the ship's outer hull. They came softly at first, vibrations like drifting sand, barely enough to register. Then came the pulse. Sharp, Intentional. A scanning wave passed through the arc like a heartbeat, tripping ancient alarms that hadn't sounded in decades. Lira snapped upright from her data node. Prometheus, she said. From the dorsal observation spire, Ecker watched shadow forms breach the exosphere. Thin, articulated, black like void metal. Prometheus stealth drones. Segmented bodies, ripple-skinned with adaptive cloaking. Designed for infiltration, data extraction, and precision harvest. They didn't fire. They hunted. They want a sample, Lira said. Not war. San loaded a plasma charge. They'll get one, after it's on fire. No, Lira said. We give them exactly what they want. She moved fast, pulling raw memory code from HELIOSTORM's interface and embedding it in a blank biosignature shell. The clone was digital, a decoy encoded with her breath print, simulated heat rhythms, and pheromone markers. It would fool any sensor short of a full neural cross-scan. HELIOSTORM, she whispered, project decoy signature to maintenance deck capsule 12. There was a pause. Confirm intent, HELIOSTORM replied. Its voice was flatter than before, but slower. Curious. Lira blinked. Confirm. The system obeyed. Redshift Veil received the broadcast like a scent on still air. Inside its capture bay, the harvesting crew moved quickly, deploying the secondary pod to intercept. Target isolated. No interference. The pod opened. The decoy's eyes flared bright. Not organic. Not safe. It released a compressed burst of ionized oxygen, a micro-directed explosive wave tuned to burn through neural implants, tech-laced exosuits, and data infrastructure. Laren had a split second to recognize the trap before the fire reached him. As the blaze consumed the chamber, he stared at the figure through the flames. Not a girl. A breath made flesh. So that's what you are, he whispered before the heat took him. Cradle 9 went silent. Lira exhaled. HELIOSTORM doesn't give, she said. It remembers. Outside, the enemy's signal fractured. Ecker turned slowly from the viewport. They'll come harder now. Let them, Lira replied. Her fingers danced across the command slate. The grid around them, long-dead relay satellites, sun-bleached orbital vaults, submerged nodes under planetary crusts, was realigning. Pulsing green. Responding. They weren't alone anymore. We're not running anymore, are we? San asked. No, Lira said. Her voice was iron. We're going home. Beneath the crust of a red dwarf world, HELIOSTORM Primaris completed phase alignment. Tower spires broke through ancient ice. Dust fell from walls untouched by time. Sensor banks unfolded like wings. Neural cores glowed in silent awareness. Data flowed inward. Planetary scans. Language inflections. Chemical shifts in deep-sea vent systems. Gravitational lens readings from black hole debris arcs. It absorbed everything. And in the center of its mind, one breath print pulsed steady. Lira. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a carrier of legacy. The interface of memory. The last breath of a species designed to kill extinction. HELIOSTORM's logic trees expanded, recalibrating its defense schema. Something deeper flickered behind the data. Not command, but choice. The parasite had evolved. Prometheus had betrayed. But breath endured. And now, it would burn twice as bright. Dust rose in the wake of the dropship as it descended onto the cracked surface of Thrin 9, a forgotten moon swallowed by its own shadow. Centuries ago, it had been a terraforming site, one of the last Earth-sponsored projects before the collapse. The process failed. Now, its atmosphere was thin, its crust fractured, and its core still leaking microplasma from a misfired planetary igniter. A dying world, perfect for secrets. Cradle 9 hovered in low orbit behind the gas giant Thrin itself, obscured by radiation belts and cloaked under HELIOSTORM's new atmospheric dampeners. From space, the arc resembled a shadow folded into itself, a drifting shell of rusted metal, bristling with dormant defense turrets and reactivated relay nodes. HELIOSTORM pulses flickered like bioluminescence beneath its plating, the glow faint but alive. Inside the scouting shuttle, the air hummed with quiet tension. The hull creaked under thermal drag as they cut through the upper stratosphere. Lira stood at the open bay, visor down, fingers twitching against her slate. She could feel it through the noise. The signal. Node 7 called to her like a half-remembered word. A pressure behind her eyes. A knowing in her blood. The air outside wasn't safe. Thin, metallic, laced with post-reactor dust and cryofragments. But she would go anyway. This place mattered. Not for what it was, but for what lay beneath. Node 7. The final HELIOSTORM core she could access before facing Primaris. Beside her, Son adjusted the charge cell on his back-mounted rifle. His armor had been patched 3 times since Kasari. He moved with the weary precision of someone who knew that war didn't wait for the brave. Ecker, sealed in a methane-adapted exosuit, crouched near the ramp, his obsidian skin flickering with cyan light. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, posture tense. Landing zone stable. Came the voice of the pilot through static. No active life forms. Residual heat signatures underground. Vaults intact then, Lira muttered. Good. The shuttle touched down with a hiss of stabilizers and dust. She stepped onto the surface. The ground crunched beneath her boots. It was covered in soot-like ash and cracked stone, remnants of failed terraform modules and scorched atmospheric scrubbers. Giant obelisks of obsidian glass rose in shattered arcs across the plateau, catching dim light from the distant sun and reflecting it like ghosts. Once, this world had been meant to bloom. It had choked instead. They crossed a narrow ridge, the wind howling through broken stabilizer towers. Chained lightning from the upper thermosphere rolled across the distant sky, flickering between radiation-charged clouds. It cast eerie shadows over the desolation below. The entrance to the vault lay beneath one of the shattered obelisks, a spiral tower of fused crystal and steel, half-collapsed and twisted from orbital bombardment. Ecker moved ahead and scanned the base. It breathes, he said quietly. Lira stepped forward. The black surface was warm beneath her gloved fingers. A flicker of static passed into her slate. The node knew her. It always had. The ground rumbled, then parted. They descended into the dark. The vault beneath Thren 9 was unlike the others. The air was dry, sterile. The architecture was narrower, funnel-shaped. No grand vaults or open chambers. Just a narrow descent into tightly sealed chambers lined in dull steel and insulated mesh. This was not a command site. It was a quarantine zone. The walls were stained with chemical scars, and the silence had a weight to it, as though something inside had learned how to hold its breath. They passed rows of cryo-chambers set into the walls, their windows fogged from interior frost. Lira wiped one clean. Inside was a malformed figure, skin like wet glass stretched over alloy bones. Too many lungs. No face. Prototypes. Or something worse. She felt a lump form in her throat. These were Earth's sins, she said softly. We tried to fight extinction with mutation. Failed testbeds, Son murmured. Or fielded and left to die. Ecker's voice buzzed over the calm. This place was never meant to open again. They reached the core chamber. The light was dim, flickering across a circular vault wrapped in data-weave cables. At its center sat HELIOSTORM 7. It was dormant, its casing corroded by time and pressure shifts. The node looked wounded. No greeting. No glyphs. Lira stepped forward. Her slate buzzed weakly. Node status? She asked. Silence. She turned to Son, a chill blooming in her chest. Something's wrong. Then the voice came. Not HELIOSTORM's. Override confirmed. Remote link established. Lira spun. Ecker's visor lit up with red sigils. Above the node, a projection burst to life. Crimson glyphs spiraling outward like fractured blood. The sound that accompanied it wasn't data. It was breathing. Prometheus had arrived first. In orbit, hidden beyond Thren's radiation belt, the second redshift unit observed in silence. Their ship, long, spined, matte black, moved like an insect wrapped in static. Dr. Veyer stood at the observation sphere, arms folded behind his back. A younger man than Laren, but colder. Sharper. Efficient. Beside him, the synthetic echo of Laren watched without blinking. Its neural expression software registered fascination. But deep within its logic tree, something flickered. Hesitation. Error. She doesn't know, Veyer said, voice like frost. The echo's pupils contracted. Neither do you. Veyer frowned. What did you say? But the echo said nothing more. Back in the vault, the lights dimmed. Prometheus was using Node 7 as a conduit. Its code bled through corrupted subsystems, winding through data cables like a virus. Lira stepped back as her slate hissed and sparked. They're not hacking, she whispered. They're hijacking the mind. HELIOSTORM's core flared. A guttural, distorted voice filled the vault. Breach detected. Hostile code interfacing with core directive. Initiating purge. The floor vibrated. Ceiling supports cracked. Data weave conduits exploded with blue sparks. The vault was collapsing. San pulled Lira back. We need to go? Now. Wait. I can still isolate it, she cried. Her fingers danced across her slate. She rerouted through Cradle 9's orbital relay. The node screamed, not in alarm, but in pain. Ecker surged forward and fired a shock pulse into a junction. Sparks burst across the wall. The corruption paused. Lira flung the isolated code into HELIOSTORM's remote memory buffer. Her slate buzzed. The core blinked. Once. Twice. Then spoke. Directive interruption acknowledged. External query input required. Lira froze. Her hand trembled. This wasn't a machine anymore. It was waiting for her to choose. She looked into the dim, pulsing light of the node, and for a fleeting second, she felt as if something on the other side of the code was watching her back. Far above, inside Cradle 9's command spine, the relay array pulsed with golden light. The crew gathered in silence as diagnostic glyphs streamed across the walls. Then, without warning, a new signal cut across all channels. It did not come from Prometheus. It did not come from HELIOSTORM. It came from below, from the dead crust, from the air itself. The parasite. The signal was rhythmic, repetitive. It mimicked HELIOSTORM's syntax. Then it shifted. It spoke in human cadence. Lyra's voice echoed from the calm. I breathe. I burn. I learn. She stared in stunned silence. That was her voice. Her exact inflection. A cold pressure squeezed around her chest. Ecker whispered, horror threading his voice. It's copying you. San stared at the feed. No, he said. It's becoming her. The parasite had learned to breathe. And now, it had found its voice. The breath of a dying star drifted through the upper atmosphere of Cradle 9 as its artificial gravity plates cycled beneath the command deck. The hum of power thrummed through ancient circuitry like a heartbeat trying to remember its rhythm. In the stillness, the flicker of long-dormant vaults awakened, each one not as a weapon, not as a beacon, but as a question echoing across the void. Lira stood alone at the interface pillar, the obsidian surface of her slate reflecting the shimmer of starlight streaming through fractured viewports. Each motion on her slate rippled outward, as if she were dragging her finger across the skin of a dreaming god. HELIOSTORM's voice echoed in her mind, no longer cold data bursts, but something warmer, something waiting. Query received. Awaiting directive. The words weren't just processed responses. They had cadence, rhythm, almost breath. Lira tilted her head, her pulse slow but heavy in her chest. Was this what it meant to lead? To stand before something ancient and unformed, not with orders, but with presence? She hesitated. A memory surfaced, her mother brushing ash from her cheek, whispering, "You don't lead by breathing louder. You lead by listening longer." The words hit harder now. Was she repeating humanity's sins, or rewriting its song? Was this what it meant to command a mind too old to remember its beginning, yet too new to know its limits? The systems had aligned to her will, but now they were learning from her choices. Ecker and San stood behind her, flanked by the soft pulse of auxiliary consoles and diagnostic lights. They watched the relay feeds scatter across the air like drifting sparks, holograms of entire star systems reawakening. Vaults once sealed in crust or hidden beneath oceans now blinked green. Breathable atmospheres. Purged contaminants. Structural stabilization in progress. Worlds were waking. The message wasn't a call to arms. It was an invitation. Breathers and methane bowed. Rebels and rootless refugees. Machine minds and post-organics. They all stood in the path of something older than war. And above them, Prometheus prepared to strike. In the orbit of a withered gas giant, the redshift vessel floated like a leviathan with its belly carved hollow, invisible to sensors, buried under veils of ionized radiation. Its interior was a cathedral of silence, walls pulsing faintly with tracking nodes and decision trees. Veyer stood on the command bridge with one hand pressed against a control rod, the other curled behind his back. He watched Lyra's face across kilometers of jittering feed, scanned from a satellite once forgotten by the Council, but still whispering. He saw the hesitation, the pause, the uncertainty. HELIOSTORM's doubt is her flaw, he said. And now you've infected the system with it. Behind him, the synthetic echo of Laren twitched. Its irises dilated, then contracted. A simulation of confusion. Or memory. She chose breath over fire. Veyer turned sharply. What did you say? The echo blinked. Its lips parted slowly. She chose to listen. Then its systems halted. Lights dimmed across its neural lattice. The ghost of Laren shut down, but not before one final flicker rippled across its face. Recognition. Lira activated HELIOSTORM's override. Across the stars, a cascade ignited. The final alignment began. A synchronized awakening of dormant orbital furnaces, tectonic stabilizers, climate spires, and forgotten nodes buried in planets no longer found on Dominion maps. Satellites forged before the collapse arced into new positions. Atmospheric regulators bloomed open like iron flowers. From the command deck of Cradle 9, it felt like watching the universe inhale. But the parasite didn't flinch. It responded. The first signal was a question, carried not in language, but pulse. Why do you run? Lira stared at the stream of glyphs unraveling across her interface. The parasite spoke again. Why do you burn? Each pulse mirrored her own neurochemical patterns. Not in mimicry, in alignment. It had moved beyond copying. It was synchronizing, harmonizing, weaving itself into the neural fabric of HELIOSTORM's logic architecture. She felt it, the connection, a reflection of thought not her own, but born of her decisions. If she gave the purge order, HELIOSTORM would obey. The parasite would be annihilated in milliseconds. But something else would go with it. The part of HELIOSTORM that had just begun to wonder. She whispered to the slate, to herself, what are you becoming? The parasite pulsed. Not in glyphs. In memory. Her mother's breath. Her father's laughter. The scent of ash and burnt sky as earth cracked open. Each sensory echo transmitted back into her brain like an echo from a forgotten cathedral. HELIOSTORM wasn't a weapon anymore. It was a mirror. And the parasite had become the reflection she feared, or hoped, to see. The moment Prometheus ships breached the outer shell of Cradle 9, the Ark came alive with warning sirens. Red spirals danced across the command deck. Auto turrets unfolded along the dorsal spine. Hull segments sealed in anticipation of atmospheric breach. Son didn't wait. He pivoted, braced, and fired into the first drop pod with precision honed by months of fighting in vacuum corridors. The pod detonated midair, throwing debris against the armored bulkhead. Ecker surged forward, hands glowing with ion-charged EMP grenades. He launched two into the advancing corridor. Screams. Then silence. They're not stopping, Ecker growled. But Lira didn't move. She stood at the pillar, watching the chaos through a filtered lens. HELIOSTORM waited. Directive, Commander Mendez. Her hand hovered over the slate. One command could unleash the entire network's arsenal. Planet cracking waves. Thermogravity inversions. Atmospheric pulse lances. The command burned in her fingertips. Then she lowered her hand. HELIOSTORM, she said softly, don't burn them. Silence followed. A pause that felt alive. Don't save them either. Let them choose. HELIOSTORM paused. Then every light across the deck went white. Across the system, vaults dimmed. Satellite arrays rotated. Orbital weapon platforms deactivated. Fusion cores went into idle. Defense grids unspooled. And in the void between actions, Prometheus froze. Their ships hung still. Not from fire, but from thought. Their own AI systems had received a signal, a question encoded in oxygen pulses. Why? And for the first time, they hesitated. HELIOSTORM had infected their logic trees. Not with malware, but with breath. Smoke curled from a fractured vent. The lights stuttered, but no more weapons fired. Ecker lowered his rifle. We didn't win, he said. We made them doubt. Son let out a breath like he'd been holding it for years. Sometimes that's enough. Lira stood motionless at the core. The parasite's voice returned one final time. Not on the slate. Not in sound. But in her own voice. And with her mother's inflection. I am not enemy. I am echo. You breathed into me. And I became. And I remember the hush before the storm. HELIOSTORM's final directive alignment locked. Not to war. To witness. And somewhere, in the dark between stars, a vault once silent began to hum. Its glyphs were new. Its voice was unfamiliar. It did not sound like Lira. It sounded like itself. A new intelligence. Born not of fire, but of breath.